Hello, bruvs. We're back with Donna Tartt's The Little Friend.
In a dimly lit gambling casino, as I saw you, my heart called your name. Something told me that in that casino, I was playing a losing game. As the red and black wheels started turning, someone else made your heart do the same. Though I won with each turn, I kept learning. I was playing a losing game. It's the old story of lucky in gambling, unlucky in love. I could see a new love was beginning. I could tell that your heart was aflame. And I knew, even though I kept winning, I was playing a losing game. It's the old story of lucky in gambling, unlucky in love. I could see a new love was beginning. I could tell that your heart was aflame. And I knew, even though I kept winning, I was playing a losing game.
All right, bruvs. We're back with Donna Tartt's The Little Friend, Chapter 7. And let me open this chat room and then shall read. I believe we're at page 472. 472 of 555 pages. So we're in the home stretch of this book. In the home stretch. Let's get the bell out, hold the book down, and let's go. Harriet, too, early the same morning, just as it was light out, started up from her bed in a panic. What had scared her, what dream, she hardly knew. It was daylight, but only just. The rain had stopped, and the room was still and shadowy. What's up, Robs? Can you search up salesman animation? Negative. It was daylight, but only just. The rain had just stopped, and the room was still and shadowy. From Allison's bed, jumbled teddy bears, a cockeyed kangaroo, stared at her fixedly over a drift of bedclothes. Nothing of Allison visible except a long wisp of hair floating and fanning across the pillow like the hair of a drowned girl awash at water's surface. No clean shirts were in the bureau. Quietly, she eased Allison's drawer open and was delighted to find among the tangle of dirty clothes a pressed and neatly folded shirt, an old Girl Scout shirt. Harriet brought it up to her face for a long, dreamy breath. It still smelled just faintly of Ida's washing. Harriet put on her shoes and tiptoed downstairs. All was silence except the tick of the clock. The clutter and mess was less sordid. Somehow, in the morning light which glowed rich upon the banister and the dusty mahogany tabletop, in the stairwell smiled the lush schoolgirl portrait of Harriet's mother, pink lips, white teeth, sparkling gigantic eyes, with white stars that flashed. Ting! In dazzled pupils. Harriet crept by it like a burglar past the motion detector, all doubled over, and into the living room, where she stooped and retrieved the gun from under Ida's chair. In the hall closet, she searched for something to carry it in, and found a thick plastic drawstring bag. but the outline, she noticed, was obvious through the plastic. So she took it out again, wrapped it in several thick layers of newspaper, and slung the bundle over her shoulder like Dick Whittington in the storybook Gone to Seek His Fortune. As soon as she stepped outside, a bird sang out, practically in her ear, it seemed, a sweet, clear, lattering phrase which burst and fell and surged up again. Though August was not yet over, something dusty and cool like fall tingled in the morning air. The zinnias in Mrs. Fountain's yard, firecracker reds, hot orange and gold, were starting to nod, their raggedy heads freckled and fading, except for the birds, which sang loud and piercingly with a loony optimism akin to emergency. The street was solitary and still. A sprinkler whirred on an empty lawn. The street lamps, the lighted porches glowed in long, empty perspectives, and even the insignificant sound of her footsteps on the pavement seemed to echo and carry far. Dewy grass, wet streets that rolled out black and wide like they were on forever. As she drew closer to the freight yards, the lawns got smaller, the houses shabbier and closer together. Several streets over, towards Italian Town, a solitary car roared past. Her practice would be starting soon, only a few blocks away on the shady grounds of the old hospital. Harriet had heard them shouting and yelling over there the last few mornings. Past Natchez Street, the sidewalks were buckled and cracked and very narrow, hardly a foot wide. Harriet walked past boarded-up buildings with sagging porches, yards with rusted propane tanks, and grass that hadn't been cut in weeks. A red chow dog with matted fur hit his chain-link fence with a rattle, teeth flashing in his blue mouth. Chop, chop. Mean as he was, the chow, Harriet felt sorry for him. He looked as if he'd never been bathed in his life, and in winter, his owners left him outside with nothing but an aluminum pie tin of frozen water. Past the food stamp office, past the burned-out grocery store, struck by lightning, never rebuilt, she turned off on the gravel road that led to the freight yards and the railroad water tower. She had no very clear idea what she was going to do or what lay ahead of her. And it was best if she didn't think about it too much. Studiously, she kept her eyes on the wet gravel, which was littered with black sticks and leafy branches, blown down by the storm the night before. Long ago, the water tower had provided the water for steam engines, but if it was used for anything now, she didn't know. A couple of years before, Harriet and a boy named Dick Pillow had climbed up there to see how far they could see, which was pretty far, practically to the interstate. The view had captivated her. Wash fluttering on lines, peaked roofs like a field of origami arcs. Roofs red and green and black and silver, roofs of shingle and copper and tar and tin spread out before them in the airy, dreamy distance. It was like seeing into another country. The vista had a whimsical, toy quality which reminded her of pictures she'd seen of the Orient, of China, of Japan. Beyond crawled the river, the yellow surface wrinkled and glinting, and the distances seemed so vast that it was easy to believe that a glittering clockwork Asia lay hammering and humming and clanging its million miniature bells just beyond the horizon. Just the river's muddy dragon coils. View had captivated her so completely that she had paid little attention to the tank. Try as she might, she could not remember exactly. That seems wrong. Let's go back and look at that. Yeah, it does say muddy dragon coils. The view had captivated her so completely that she had paid little attention to the tank. Try as she might, she could not remember exactly what it was like up top, or how it was constructed, only that it was wooden, and that a door was cut into the roof. This, in Harriet's memory, was an outline about 2 feet square with hinges and a handle like a kitchen cabinet. Though her imagination was so vivid that she could never be quite sure what she actually remembered and what her fancy had colored in to fill the blanks, the more she thought of Danny Ratliff, crouched at the top of the tower, his tense posture, the agitated way he kept looking over his shoulder, the more it seemed to her that he was hiding something, or trying to hide himself. But what rose up again and again in her mind was the jangled off-center agitation as his gaze had brushed across her own and flared up like a sunbeam, striking a signal mirror. It was as if he were bouncing back a code, a distress alarm, a recognition. Somehow he knew she was out here. She was in his field of awareness in a strange way, and it gave Harriet a chill to realize it. Danny Ratliff was the only person who really looked at her for a long time. The sunlit rails gleamed like dark mercury, arteries branching out silver from the switch points. The old telegraph poles were shaggy with kudzu and Virginia creeper, and above them rose the water tower, its surface all washed out by the sun. Harriet cautiously stepped towards it in the weedy clearing. Around and around it she walked, around the rusted metal legs at a distance of about 10 feet. Then, with a nervous glance over her shoulder, no cars or sound of cars, no noise, but bird cries, she came forward to look up at the ladder. The bottom rung was higher than she remembered. A very tall man might not have to jump for it, but anybody else would. 2 years ago, when she'd come with Dick, she stood on his shoulders, and then, precariously, he'd climbed up on the banana seat of his bicycle to follow her. Dandelions, tufts of dead grass poking through the gravel, crickets singing frantically. They seemed to know that it was the end of summer, that soon they would be dying, and the urgency of their song gave the morning air a fevered, unstable, shimmery feeling. Harriet examined the legs of the tank, metal H girders, perforated every 2 feet or so with oblong holes, angling in towards the tank ever so slightly. Higher up, the substructure was supported by metal poles that crossed diagonally in a giant X. If she shimmied up high enough on a front leg, it was a long way up. Harriet was no good at estimating distances. She might possibly inch her way over to the ladder on one of the lower crossbars. Gamely, she started up. Though the cut had healed, her left palm was still sore, forcing her to favor her right hand. The perforations were just large enough to give her the smallest possible openings in which to wedge her fingers and the tip of her sneakers. Up she climbed, breathing hard. It was slow going. The girder was powdered with heavy that came off brick red on her hands. Though she was not afraid of heights, heights exhilarated her. She loved to climb. There was not much to hold on to, and every inch was an effort. Even if I fall, she told herself, it won't kill me. Harriet had fallen and jumped from some very high places. The roof of the tool shed, the big limb of the pecan tree in Edie's yard, the scaffolding in front of the Presbyterian church, had never broken a bone. All the same, she felt exposed to prying eyes so high up. And every sound from below, every crackle or bird cry, made her want to look away from the rusted beam 6 inches in front of her nose. Close up the beam, it was a world all to itself, the desert surface of a rusty red planet. Her hands were growing numb. Sometimes on the playground, when playing tug-of-war hanging from a rope, or from the top bar of a jungle gym, Harriet was overcome by a strange impulse to relax her grip and let herself fall. And this was the impulse she now fought. Up she hauled herself, gritting her teeth, concentrating all her strength into her aching fingertips, and a rhyme from an old book, a baby book, shook loose and jingled through her mind. Old Mr. Chang, I've oft heard it said, you wear a basket upon your head. You've 2 pairs of scissors to cut your meat, and 2 pairs of chopsticks with which you eat. With her last surge of willpower, she grabbed the lowest crossbar and pulled herself up. Old Mr. Chang. His picture in the storybook had scared her to death when she was little, with his pointed Chinese hat and his thread-like mustache and his long, sly Mandarin eyes. But what had scared her most about him was the slender pair of scissors he held up ever so delicately, and his long, thin, mocking smile. Harriet paused and took stock of her position. Next, this was the tricky part. She was going to have to swing her leg out into open space to the crossbeam. She took a deep breath and hoisted herself into the emptiness. A sideways view of the ground heaved up at her, all cockeyed, and for a heartbeat, Harriet was sure she was falling. The next instant, she found herself astraddle the bar, clutching it like a sloth. She was very high up now, high enough to break her neck, and she closed her eyes and rested for a moment, her cheek against the rough iron. Old Mr. Chang, I've oft heard it said, you wear a basket upon your head. You've 2 pairs of scissors to cut your meat. Carefully, Harriet opened her eyes and, bracing herself on the girder, sat up. How high above the ground she was. Just like this, she'd sat astraddle a branch, muddy underpants, and the ants stinging her legs. The time she didn't get down, that was the summer after first grade. Off she had wandered from vacation Bible school. Was that it? Up she had climbed fearless like a dern squirrel, exclaimed the old man who had happened to hear Harriet's flat, embarrassed little voice, calling for help from on high. Slowly, Harriet stood, clutching the girder, knees wobbling as she rose. She transferred her grip to the overhead crossbar and hand over hand walked herself down. She could still see that old man with his humped back and his flat, blood-stained face peering up at her through a wilderness of branches. Who you belong to, he cried up to her in a hoarse voice. He had used to live in the gray stucco house by the Baptist church. That old man lived there alone. Now he was dead, and there was only a stump in his front yard where the pecan tree had been. How he had started to hear her emotionless cries, help, help, floating down from out of nowhere, looking up, down, around, and all about as if a ghost had tapped him on the shoulder. The angle of the X had grown too shallow to stand in. Harriet sat again, straddling the bars, grasped the bars on the other side. The angle was difficult. There wasn't much feeling in her hands anymore, and her heart flip-flopped violently as she swung herself out into open space, arms trembling with fatigue, and around to the other side. Safe now, down she slid, down the lower left crossbar of the X, as if sliding down the banister in her own house. He died a terrible death, that old man, and Harriet could scarcely bear to think of it. Robbers had broken into his house, forced him to lie on the floor by his bed, and beat him senseless with a baseball bat. By the time his neighbors got worried and came to check on him, he was lying dead in a pool of blood. She'd come to rest against the opposite girder. The ladder was just beyond. It wasn't such a tricky stretch, but she was tired and growing careless. And only when she found herself gripping the ladder did a jolt of terror snap through her body, for her foot had slipped and she'd caught herself only at the last instant. Now it was over, the dangerous moment, before she'd even known it was happening. She closed her eyes, held on tight until her breathing returned to normal. When she opened them again, it was as if she were suspended from the rope ladder of a hot air balloon. All the earth seemed to spread itself out before her in a panoramic view, like the castle view in her old storybook from the tower window. The splendor falls on castle walls and snowy summits old in story. The long light shakes across the lakes, and the wild cataract leaps in glory. But there was no time for daydreaming. The roar of a crop duster, which she took momentarily for a car, startled her badly, and she turned and scrambled the rest of the way up the ladder as fast as she could. Danny lay quietly on his back, staring at the ceiling. The light was harsh and sour. He felt weak, as if recovering from a fever, and suddenly he realized that he'd been looking up at the same bar of sunlight for quite some time. Somewhere outside he heard Curtis singing, some word that sounded like gumdrop, over and over again. As he lay there, he gradually became aware of a strange thumping noise, as of a dog scratching itself on the floor beside his bed. Danny struggled to his elbows and recoiled violently at the sight of Farish, who, arms crossed, foot tapping, sat in Eugene's vacated chair, regarding him with a gluey, deliberative eye. His knee was jittering, his beard was dripping wet around the mouth, as if he had spilled something on himself or else had been drooling and gnawing on his own lips. A bird, a bluebird or something, sweet, little Tweedledee, like on television, twittered outside the window. Danny shifted and was about to sit up when Farish lunged forward and prodded him in the chest. Oh, no, you don't. His amphetamine breath struck hot and foul in Danny's face. I'm on to your ass. Come on, said Danny wearily and turned his face away. Let me up. Farish reared back, and for an instant their dead father blazed up, arms crossed out of hell, and glared scornfully from behind Farish's eyes. Shut your mouth, he hissed, and shoved Danny back on the pillow. Don't say a word. You listen to me. You report to me now. Danny lay in confusion, very still. I seen interrogation, said Farish, and I seen people doped. Carelessness. I'll get us all killed. Sleep waves are magnetic, he said, tapping his forehead with two fingers. Get it? Get it? They can erase your whole mentality. You're opening yourself to electromagnetic capacity that'll fuck up and destroy your whole loyalty systems, just like that. He is whack out of his mind, thought Danny. Farish, breathing fast through the nostrils, ran a hand through his hair, and then winced and shook it spread-fingered away from his body as if he'd touched something slimy or nasty. Don't get smart with me, he roared when he caught Danny looking at him. Danny dropped his eyes and saw Curtis, his chin on a level with the threshold, peeping in the open door of the trailer. He had orange around his mouth, like he'd been playing with their grandmother's lipstick, and a secretive, amused expression on his face. Glad for the distraction, Danny smiled at him. Hey, alligator, he said, but before he could ask about the orange on his mouth, Farish spun and flung out an arm, like an orchestra conductor, some hysterical bearded Russian, and shrieked, Get out! Get out! Get out! In an instant, Curtis was gone. Bump, 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 down the trailer's metal steps. Danny inched up and started to creep out of bed, but Farish spun back around and stabbed a finger at him. Did I say get up? Did I? His face was flushed, almost purple. Let me explain something. Danny sat agreeably. We are operating at a military awareness. Copy, copy? Copy, said Danny as soon as he realized that was what he was supposed to say. All right now, here's your 4 levels. Farish counted them out on his fingers. Within the system, code green, code yellow, code orange, code red. Now, Farish held up a trembling forefinger. You might be able to guess code green from your experience in driving a motor vehicle. Go, said Danny after a long, strange, sleepy pause. Affirmative, affirmative. All systems go. In code green, you are relaxed and unalert, and there is no threat from the environment. Now listen up, said Farish between gritted teeth. There is no code green. Code green does not exist. Danny stared at a tangle of orange and black extension cords on the floor. Code green is not an option. Here's why. I'm only going to say it once. He was pacing with Farish, never a good sign. If you are attacked on a level of code green, your ass will be destroyed. Out of the corner of his eye, Danny saw Curtis's plump little paw reach out and place a package of sweet tarts upon the sill of the open window by his bed. Silently, Danny scooted over and retrieved the gift. Curtis's fingers waggled happily in acknowledgement and then dropped stealthily from view. We are currently operating at Code Orange, said Farish. In Code Orange, the danger is clear and present, and your attention is focused on it at all times. Repeat, all times. Danny slipped the packet of sweet tarts under his pillow Take it easy, man, he said. You're working yourself up. He'd meant it to come out sounding, well, easy, but somehow it didn't, and Ferris wheeled around. His face was clotted and quivering with rage, bruised and engorged and empurpled with it. Tell you what, he said unexpectedly, you and me's going to take a little ride. I can read your mind, numbnuts, he screamed, thumping the side of his head as Danny stared at him aghast. Don't think you can pull your shit on me. Danny closed his eyes for a moment, then reopened them. He had to take a piss like a racehorse. Look, man, he said pleadingly, as Ferris gnawed his lips and glowered down at the floor. Just calm down a second. Easy, he said, palms up as Ferris glanced up. A little too quick for comfort, eyes a little too jitterbugged and unfocused. Before he knew what was happening, Ferris had jerked him up by the collar and punched him in the mouth. Look at you, he hissed, jerking him up again by the shirt front. I know you inside out, motherfucker. Ferris, in a daze of pain, Danny felt his jaw, worked it back and forth. This was the point you never wanted it to come to. Ferris outweighed Danny by at least 100 pounds. Ferris slung him back on the bed. Get your shoes on, you're driving. Fine, said Danny, fingering his jaw. Where? And if it came out sounding flip, it did. Part of the reason was because Danny always drove everywhere they went. Don't you get smart with me. Ringing backhand, slap across the face. If 1 ounce of that product is missing, no. Sit down. Did I say to get up? Danny sat without a word and tugged his motorcycle boots onto his bare, sickly feet. That's right. Just keep looking right where you're looking. The screen door of Gum's trailer whined, and a moment later, Danny heard her scraping along the gravel in her house shoes. Ferris, she called in her thin, dry voice. All right, Ferris. Typical, thought Danny, just about typical that he was the one she'd be so worried about. Up, said Ferris. He grabbed Danny by the elbow and marched him towards the door and shoved him out. Danny, flung headlong down the steps, landed face down in the dirt. As he rose and dusted himself off, Gum stood expressionless, all bone and leathery skin, like a lizard in her thin house dress. Slowly, she turned her head. To Ferris, she said, What's got into him? At this, Ferris reared back in the doorway. Oh, something's got into him, all right, he screamed. She sees it, too. Oh, you think you can fool me? Ferris laughed a high, unnatural laugh. But you can't even fool your own grandmother. Gum gazed long. Oh, man, at Ferris. Then Danny, eyelids half closed and permanently sleepy looking from the cobra venom. Then she reached out her hand and caught the meat of Danny's upper arm and twisted it between thumb and forefinger, hard but in a sneaky, gentle way, so that her face and her little bright eyes remained calm. Oh, Ferris, she said, you ought not be so hard on him. But there was something in her voice which suggested that Ferris had good reason to be hard on Danny. Hard on him, indeed. Ha, shouted Ferris. They did it, he said, as if to hidden cameras at the street tree line. They got to him, my own brother. What are you talking about, said Danny, in the intense, vibrating silence that followed, and was shocked by how weak and dishonest his voice sounded. In his confusion, he stepped back as slowly, Gum crept up the steps of Danny's trailer, up to where Ferris stood, glaring daggers and breathing fast through the nose. Foul, hot little huffs. Danny had to turn his head. He couldn't even look at her because he could see only too painfully how her slowness infuriated Ferris, drove him nuts, was driving him psychotic and bug-eyed, even as he stood there, tapping that foot like, damn it, how the hell could she be so freaking pokey? Everybody saw it, everybody but Ferris. How even being in the same room with her, scratch, made him tremble with impatience, drove him apeshit, violent, bonkers. But of course, Ferris never got mad at Gum, only took his frustration out on everybody else. When finally she got to the top step, Ferris was scarlet in the face, shaking all over like a machine about to blow. Gently, she cringed up to Ferris and patted him on the sleeve. Is it really that important, she asked in a kindly tone that somehow suggested yes, it was very important indeed. Hell yes, roared Farish. I won't be spied on. I won't be stole from. I won't be lied to. No, no, he said, jerking his head in response to her light little papery claw upon his arm. Oh my, Gum's so sorry you all boys can't get along. But it was Danny she was looking at as she said it. Don't feel sorry for me, screamed Farish. Dramatically, he stepped in front of Gum as if Danny might rush in and kill them both. He's the one you need to feel sorry for. I don't feel sorry for either of you. She edged past Farish and was creeping into the open door of Danny's trailer. Gum, please, Danny said hopelessly, stepping up as far as he dared, craning to watch the pink of her faded house dress as it vanished into the dim. Gum, please don't go in there. Good night, he heard her say faintly. Let me make up this bed. Don't you be worrying over that, cried Farish, glaring at Danny as if it was all his fault. Danny darted past Farish and into the trailer. Gum, don't, he said in anguish. Please. Nothing was more certain to launch Farish into an ass-kicking rage than Gum taking it into her head to clean up after Danny or Jean. Not that either one of them wanted her to. One day years ago, and Danny would never forget it, never, he had walked in to find her methodically spraying his pillow and bedclothes with Raid insecticide. Lord, these curtains is filthy, said Gum, shuffling into Danny's bedroom. A long shadow slanted in from the threshold. I'm the one that's a-talking to you, said Farish in a low, frightening voice. You get your ass out here and listen. Abruptly, he snatched Danny by the back of the shirt and slung him back down the stairs, down into the packed dust and litter of the yard, broken lawn chairs, empty cans of beer and soda pop and WD-40, and a whole battlefield of screws and transistors and cogs and dismantled gears. And below, Danny could rise to his feet. He jumped down and kicked him viciously in the ribs. So where do you go to when you go driving off by yourself, he screamed. Huh? Danny's heart sank. Had he talked in his sleep? You said you went to mail Gum's bills, but you ain't mailed them. There they sat on the seat of the car for 2 days after you come back from wherever. Mud splashed on your tires a foot deep. You ain't got that driving down Main Street to the post office, did you? Again, he kicked Danny. Danny rolled over on his side in a ball, clutching his knees. Is Catfish in on this with you? Danny shook his head. He tasted blood in his mouth. Because I will. I'll kill that. I'm on kill the both of you. Farish opened the passenger door of the Trans Am and slung Danny in by the scruff of his neck. You drive, he shouted. Danny, wondering how he was supposed to drive from the wrong side of the car, reached up to feel his bloody nose. Thank God I'm not wired, he thought, wiping the back of his hand over his mouth. Split lip and all. Thank God I'm not wired or I'd lose my mind. Go, said Curtis brightly, toddling up to the open window. With his smeary orange lips, he made a vroom, vroom noise. Then, stricken, he noticed the blood on Danny's face. No sugar, said Danny. You're not going anywhere. But all at once, Curtis's face slackened, and grasping for breath, he turned and scurried off, just as Farish opened the door on the driver's side. Click, a whistle. In, he said. And before Danny realized what was happening, Farish's 2 German shepherds leapt into the back seat. The one named Van Zant panted noisily into his ear. Its breath was hot and smelled like rotten meat. Danny's stomach contracted. This was a bad sign. The dogs were trained to attack. On one occasion, the bitch had dug out of her pen and bit Curtis on the leg through the blue jeans so bad he had to get stitched up at the hospital. Farish, please, he said as Farish popped the seat back in place and sat down behind the wheel. Shut your mouth, Farish stared straight ahead, his eyes queerly dead. The dogs are coming. Danny made a big show of feeling around in his pocket. If I'm on drive, I need to get my wallet. Actually, what he needed was a weapon of some sort, if only a knife. The interior of the car was blazing hot. Danny swallowed. Farish, he said, if I'm on drive, I need my license. I'll just go inside now and get it. Farish leaned back in the seat and closed his eyes and stayed for a moment, very still, eyelids fluttering as if trying to fight off an impending heart attack. Then, very suddenly, he started up and roared in full throat, Eugene! Hey, said Danny over the piercing barks from the back seat. No need in calling him out here. Let me get it myself, okay? He reached for the door handle. "Ho, I seen that," shouted Farish. "Farish? I seen that too." Farish's hands had shot to the top of his boot. "Has he got a knife in there?" thought Danny. Great. Half breathless from the heat, throbbing all over with pain, he sat still for a moment, thinking how best to proceed so Farish wouldn't jump on him again. "I can't drive from this side," he said at last. "I'll go in and get my wallet, and then we can trade places." Attentively, Danny watched his brother, but Farish's thoughts had strayed elsewhere for the moment. He had turned around to face the back seat and was allowing the German shepherds to lick him all over the face. "These dogs," he said threateningly, lifting his chin over their frantic attentions, "these dogs mean more to me than any human being ever born. I care more about these two dogs here than any human life that was ever lived." Danny waited. Farish kissed and fondled the dogs, murmuring to them an indistinct baby talk. After a moment or two, the UPS coveralls were ugly enough, but one thing Danny could say for them: they made it hard, if not impossible, for Farish to conceal a gun or his person. He eased the door open and got out of the Trans Am and started across the yard. The door of Gum's trailer squeaked open with a rubbery refrigerator sound. Eugene poked his head out. "Tell him I don't care to be spoke to," in that tone. From the car, the horn blared, throwing the shepherd dogs into a fresh fit of barking. Eugene pulled his glasses low on his nose and peered over Danny's shoulder. I wouldn't let those animals ride in the car if I was you," he said. Ferris threw back his head and bellowed, "Get back out here, now!" Eugene took a deep breath, rubbed the back of his neck with his hand. Scarcely moving his lips, he said, "If he don't end up in Whitfield again, he's going to kill somebody. He come in there this morning and like to set me on fire." "What? You was asleep," said Eugene, looking apprehensively over Danny's shoulder at the Trans Am. Whatever was going on with Farish in the car, it was making him plenty nervous. He takes his lighter out and said he'd burn the rest of my face off. Don't get in the car with him. Not with them dogs. Ain't no telling what he'll do. From the car, Farish shouted, "Don't make me come after you." "Listen," said Danny, casting a nervous glance back at the Trans Am. "Will you look after Curtis? Promise me." "What for? Where you going?" said Eugene, and looked up at him sharply. Then he turned his head. "No," he said, blinking. "No, don't tell me. Don't say another word." "I'm going to count 3, screamed Farish. "Promise?" "Promise and swear to God. 1. Don't listen to Gum," said Danny, over another blare from the car horn. "She ain't going to do a thing but discourage you." 2. Danny put a hand on Eugene's shoulder. Looking quickly over at the Trans Am, the only motion he could see was the dogs, tails thumping against the window glass. He said, "Do me a favor. Stand here a minute and don't let him in." Quickly, he slipped inside the trailer and from its place on the shelf behind the television, grabbed Gum's little .22 pistol, pulled up his pants leg, and stuck it, muzzle first, in the top of his boot. Gum liked to keep it loaded, and he prayed that it still was. No time to fool with bullets. Outside, heavy, fast footsteps, he heard Eugene say in a high, frightened voice, "Don't raise your hand to me." Danny straightened his pants legs, opened the door. He was about to blurt his excuse, "My wallet," when Farish snatched him up by the collar. "Don't try to run from me, son." He hauled Danny down the steps. Halfway to the car, Curtis scuttled over and tried to throw his arms around Danny's waist. He was crying, or rather, he was coughing and choking for breath, the way he did when he was upset. Danny, stumbling along behind Farish, managed to reach back and pat him on the head. "Get back, baby," he called after Curtis. "Be good." Eugene was watching anxiously from the door of the trailer. Poor Curtis was crying now, crying to beat the band. Danny noticed that his wrist was smeared with orange lipstick where Curtis had pressed his mouth. The color was garish, shocking. For a fraction of a second, it stopped Danny cold. "I'm too tired to do this," he thought. Too tired. Then the next thing he knew, Farish had opened the driver's side of the Trans Am and slung him inside. "Drive," he said. I think that's going to have to be it. What time is it? 2:30? How many more pages are there? Mouth is dry as a board. That's it. I gotta stop. Got to stop, bruv.